Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Whoops. I guess it helps if I have my microphone set up here in front of me. Just caught me a little bit off guard there. You are tuned into the Joseph Benamy Show. Good evening, Thursday evening, June the, let's see, 6, 7, 8, 9th. 5, 6, 7, 8. Gosh, here we go again. Constantly having these issues with staying on top of this stuff. Okay, June the 8th, 2023. I'm very sorry about that. Let's start again. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Joseph Benamy Show for June the 8th, 2023. I am your host, Joseph Benamy. Thank you for joining. Tonight, a media meltdown over claims that Canada's wildfires may not be all attributable or even mostly attributable to climate change. Fascinating discussion we're going to have later on in the show. But first, as usual, we're going to take just a few minutes to discuss what I believe are the headlines, certainly the headlines that caught my eye, and that I thought you might be interested in. So, not a lot of them, just a few. The Governor General, Canada's Governor General. For those of you who don't live in Canada, we have our, of course, Parliament, we have our Prime Minister, etc., but we also are a constitutional monarchy, and the King of Canada is the same king that happens to be the King of the United Kingdom, Charles III. And his representative in Canada, when he's not here, is our Governor General. So the Governor General, it's an apolitical position, and she was in Winnipeg. And when she was there, an incident occurred. Well, let's go back 2 years on this, okay? There were some protests in front of the Manitoba legislature, the legislative building in Winnipeg, Manitoba being one of Canada's provinces. And there were two statues that were there that were vandalized. One was a statue of Queen Victoria. The other was a statue of Queen Elizabeth II. Both statues were vandalized, one of which was vandalized beyond all repair, that being the statue of Queen Victoria. Just a few weeks ago, the statue of Queen Elizabeth II was restored to its place in front of the legislative buildings in Winnipeg. It had been repaired at a cost of about $60,000. Over the weekend, that statue recently remounted was vandalized. It was spray painted with words such as colonizer and killer on it. Now, why is this important? Because it is a demonstration of how ignorant and silly and frankly stupid the protesters are. Why? Because everybody knows, if you're even half educated in this country, that Queen Elizabeth II was neither a colonizer nor a killer. And in fact, if anything, Queen Elizabeth II was the anti-colonizer. Because between 1952, when she came to the throne, and when she passed away a little less than a year ago now, in 2022, September of 2022, she oversaw, not personally at her instigation, but because, remember, she is a servant of the government in the UK as well, but she oversaw the dismantling of the British Empire as an empire and the significant decolonization of territories that, when she came to power in 1952, still were British colonies. So during her reign, if anything else, if you characterized Queen Elizabeth as anything. It was the decolonizing monarch. So to spray paint, to deface her statue, to call her a colonizer is just factually wrong. It's just utterly categorically wrong. If anything, you should be, if you are an anti-colonialist, you should be embracing and celebrating Queen Elizabeth II for the role that she played in overseeing, on an official capacity, the decolonization, the end of the British Empire, and the reestablishment of voluntary ties between those countries that had been British colonies or under the British Empire and the mother country, the United Kingdom. Voluntary ties in the British Commonwealth of Nations. Look it up. British Commonwealth of Nations, to get an idea of how profoundly wrong anyone is when they accuse Elizabeth II of having any truck with colonization. It's just plain stupid. Moving on, because we're just doing headlines here. This isn't supposed to be the crux of the show. Moving on, Winnipeg school trustee. A trustee in the Winnipeg has been suspended for, quote, transphobic social media posts. Now, this caught my eye. I'm always interested in reading what's going on this particular file because there's a lot of give and take. There's a lot of conflict. Some of it is justified, some of it is not justified, etc. So I have a particular interest in following this type of story, particularly also when it comes to the whole free speech issue, which has been significantly under assault, not just in this country, but throughout the Western world. So I decided, well, I will look into this a little further. And unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, beside the headline, even though there was a long media story around the decision to suspend this particular school trustee for these alleged transphobic social media posts, I can't give you more than that. And that's the story itself, from my perspective. Why? Because the media has reported that she made these comments. The media has reported that she has been suspended for 3 months. And the media it was a long story. But nowhere is the media reporting what she allegedly said, or wrote, or posted. Now, how are we supposed to know that justice has been served here? Justice has to be served in an open environment where free people are able to assess whether or not the claims that have been made against her and the penalty that's been imposed on her are in fact just. But nothing in this story. So how do we judge what's going on? We're going to talk about wildfires. I mean, you can't not talk about wildfires in Canada if you're talking about headlines, because half of the headlines in Canada are about wildfires right now. But I'm saving that for later on in the show. That's what I really want to get into. So let's move to international headlines right now. First one that jumps out at me, saw this yesterday, didn't say anything about it yesterday, probably should have. White woman arrested in a fatal shooting of a black neighbor in Florida. That's the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, that has posted this particular story as a headline story in its news online. Why am I mentioning this? Because, first of all, I really am surprised, or maybe I shouldn't be, that this is a headline in Canada's media, but I'm at a loss again as to understand why we have to emphasize people's race or color, okay? Because it just attracts conflict, it foments conflict, and it attracts commentary, as I'm going to make now, that I'm sure is going to offend somebody out there. But I have to say it. White woman arrested in fatal shooting of black neighbor in Florida makes a headline anywhere, but black woman arrested in fatal shooting of black neighbor makes no headline, even though that kind of thing is happening in far, far greater numbers than white woman arrested in fatal shooting of black neighbor. So I can't help but make the observation here, without getting into racial politics or anything like that, but I have to make the observation, ladies and gentlemen, that this is racism itself, the way that this is reported. It doesn't matter what color of skin the perpetrator had or the victim had. And frankly, it doesn't matter whether it's black on black violence, and it doesn't matter that it's black on white violence. None of that matters. We're all supposed to be human beings, and we're all supposed to be equal before the law. So why would we emphasize this? Giving people the impression that this is the immediate impression that it gives, that it was racially motivated. I mean, it's absurd. And if it was racially motivated, okay, well, that's something that could be brought out in the story, but it's not. Apparently, this was a long-standing dispute between two neighbors. Was there a racial component in it? Well, nothing like that was touched on in the story. So why imply that there was a racial motivation here? Again, I could be making the same comments, and I probably would, if it was black on black shooting, black on white shooting, Chinese on Japanese shooting, whatever. Okay? The fact is, in every one of those examples, it's race that's being emphasized for no apparent reason. And if I'm not reporting, and if I'm not making that criticism on other stories, it's because we're not seeing other headlines like that. And actually, I think that's a tragedy, because I think it's important for members of the black community in the United States in particular to be aware of what's going on in their own community, or in black communities across the country that maybe is not where they're living. I don't know. But again, I deplore this kind of unnecessary, gratuitous race baiting in media headlines. Okay, what else is in the news? Yesterday, I reported a headline about the first quote-unquote virgin birth in crocodiles that had been recorded. And I mentioned to you that I would look into this a little bit further, and I have. So bear with me for a minute here. Okay, I want to talk just a bit about this story and a wee bit of background to put it into some context. The case that it was reported here actually didn't just occur. Why it's making headlines now, I don't know, but it occurred in 2018. And it was just revealed in a particular study published in the journal Biology Letters earlier this week. Now, apparently, these types of births, and I hate the term virgin birth, because I think that the headline writers here and the story writers, I think we're just being too clever by a half. We all know what they're referring to. They're referring to the virgin birth in the Christian religion, okay? And I don't think it's necessary to do that, but I think it's important to understand that this is actually not an entirely unheard of thing. The process is called facultative parthenogenesis. And what that involves, and I apologize for all of you out there who are real biological experts and understand this particular narrow aspect of the field, if I'm not getting this perfectly 100% right. But essentially, there are some species out there that do not need to cohabitate, male and female, in order to reproduce. And amongst other species where that is the norm, this kind of thing does happen, where an egg is however it is that the chromosomes in the egg end up coming together and forming an embryo, that in some cases the egg actually has a condition where these chromosomes and the conditions exist within the egg already, and it doesn't require fertilization. Okay, it happens with certain types of plants on a regular basis, and it's not that it's rare, but it's not unheard of in certain types of species of animals and insects. Okay, so nothing to see here. Move on, I think is how this saying goes. One other thing about this particular report, though, this particular instance with a crocodile, was the first time that this has been observed in a crocodile, apparently. But it's important to know that of the 14 eggs that were allegedly produced by this particular female crocodile, only 7 were viable. That is to say, only 7 of them were properly fertilized and I assume had a growing embryo. And of those 7, none of them hatched. None of them hatched. One of the eggs that didn't hatch apparently did have a fully formed fetus that was 99.9% genetically identical to the mother. Okay, so 9-year study. Oh, just as a final comment on this, 9-year study on these types of things in turkeys. Apparently this happens from time to time in turkeys. Found that even though it's very rare in turkeys, it does happen. And when it does happen, only 3.3% of the eggs hatch. So there's no great discovery here. It's nothing new. And when it does happen, it basically follows the rest of the laws of science, which means no real viable offspring, at least in animals that we normally would follow. Before we go for a break, here's another headline that I thought you'd be interested in, and this will tie into, as we're moving forward, the discussion we're having on the wildfires in Canada. Apparently, according to a group of scientists, the world is warming at a record 0.2%. That is, 2%. I'm getting it wrong. Not 0.2%. 0.2 degrees Celsius, 0.2 of a degree Celsius. That's 1/5 of a degree Celsius per decade, according to a group of top scientists. This is a warning on their behalf. Record high greenhouse gas emissions have caused an unparalleled acceleration in global warming. 50 top scientists warned on Thursday in a sweeping climate science update. Ironically, and this is what I haven't reported yet, but it is, in fairness, part of the story, one of the big climate success stories of the past decade has inadvertently hastened the pace of global warming, according to the new data. And what is that, you ask? Diminishing air pollution. Yes, a gradual drop in the use of coal has reduced the air pollution that shields the Earth from the full force of the sun's rays. Longer and more intense heat waves will pose a life and death threat in the coming decades, according to this report, across large swaths of South and Southeast Asia, along with areas straddling the equator in Africa and Latin America, according to the research. Now, the story says recent research has shown. So the first thing I just wanted to point out on this story was, of course, and of course we're not arguing. For all of you out there, they're going to say, Ben, I mean, what are you talking about? Okay, I'm not arguing that it's bad for the environment that we've reduced pollution. Okay, of course it's good for the environment. I'm merely pointing out that, a year ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, nobody was actually thinking that maybe by reducing pollution, we might be contributing to global warming. And this is an example of the unintended consequences that come along with our actions that nobody actually anticipated. So in this case, the fact that we've been successful in reducing pollution and reducing it in a way aggressively that is intended to reduce greenhouse gases, that we are reducing the greenhouse gases, but at the same time, we're also increasing the effect of the sun and exacerbating the so-called global warming climate change crisis. One other point I want to make on this particular story, and that is I think I want to respond to this claim at the end of this, the statement, recent research has shown. This is a very good example of the subtle and yet serious bastardization and misuse of the English language. Recent research in this story hasn't shown anything because recent research, now this is what they're saying, okay? I'm going to read it again. Longer and more intense heat waves will pose a life and death threat in the coming decades. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Recent research has shown. And I'm saying, no. Recent research, no research shows anything that has not happened yet. Okay, research cannot predict anything. Research only shows the things that could be measured in the here and now, or perhaps in the past. But for future, research doesn't show anything. Research shows something today. Researchers take that data, that information, and they interpret it, and then they make predictions based on their interpretations. And again, I can't help but say this. I can't say it strongly enough. Most of the dire predictions that climate change researchers have made based on their interpretations and the models that they've developed to help them make predictions haven't come true. And again, in this story, a very important aspect of this is this whole discovery that while we've been reducing carbon emissions by our aggressive campaign against coal-fired whatever, apparently research is showing that that in itself has contributed to global warming. So, the law of unintended consequences. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go for a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about Canada's wildfires and, what exactly is going on here in Canada. You won't want to miss that, so stay tuned. We'll be back in a couple of minutes here on The Joseph Ben-Ami Show. And we are back. You are listening to the Joseph Ben-Ami Show for Thursday, June the 8th, 2023. I'm your host, Joseph Ben-Ami. Thanks for sticking with us. All right, so we've been talking about the headlines, etc. Ran a little bit over time in that segment, but, that's kind of par for the course for what we're doing here. We're not that rigid in how we structure the show, as long as it's about an hour long. All right, Canada's wildfires. If you are paying attention to the news anywhere, ladies and gentlemen, you are going to be all over this because it's making headlines everywhere. There's the wildfires here in Canada and the attendant smoke that is drifting in many population areas here across the country. And those are the headlines here in Canada. I haven't done an actual count, but my guess is probably 50, even more than 50% of major news headlines at the moment are pertain to this particular subject. And then if you move south of the border, well, they're just going crazy. They're going crazy with two things. First of all, of course, there is the smoke that's drifting over the border into the United States, and it's having some impact on people. If you have respiratory difficulties, whether you're in the United States or Canada, this is going to affect them. And other side effects that are going on right now. But the other interesting story that I noted in the U.S. media in particular is what I was surprised to see today, and that was the number of headlines, not just in the alternative media, if I could use that term, but also in the mainstream media, basically shooting down anybody who is saying that these fires are not attributable to climate change, and in particular that many of these fires may actually be attributable to arson. And so as I was doing a bit of a survey, I came across a lot of these stories, delving into them, going on about how there's no evidence of this. This is just Looney Tune, climate change denier, conspiracy theories. Okay. And, after all, our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, and President Biden in the United States got together today, and they both issued statements warning that this is just more evidence of climate change. Climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, if you follow me, you know that I'm not crazy on the right. I'm for sure a solid conservative, but I'm open-minded too. Okay, just because you're a conservative doesn't mean you have to be closed-minded, and even if you're a liberal, you don't have to be closed-minded, although I have to say that in my judgment, there's a lot more closed-mindedness in the liberal camp than there is in the conservative camp, but we do have closed-minded conservatives as well. I'm not one of them. So I want to look into these things. I'm interested in them. And from time to time, when somebody says something that disproves some of the things that I've been saying or some of the opinions I have, I'm not afraid to face up to it. And from time to time, I'll even report it, as you very well know. I'd rather be right than consistent. So I'm asking, can somebody please draw me a line from climate change, and I'm saying climate change theory, man-made climate change theory, or not, just natural occurring climate change, and the fact that we have so many wildfires? I just don't see it. It's possible that we're having more because we've had a somewhat warmer and drier spring in certain areas of the country, and as a consequence of that, we're probably going to have more wildfires. And the number of wildfires that we have in this country goes up and down every year. We'll get to that in a minute. I just want to address, first of all, for a minute or two, I want to address this argument that I'm seeing in so much of the mainstream news that there's no evidence It's all conspiracy theory about the fact that, or the idea that maybe some of these wildfires are in fact man-made, that they didn't occur naturally. Okay, so no evidence? Well, how about the fact that Calgary police have arrested and charged a man in the Inglewood Park brush fire? Now, this is not a major forest fire consuming hundreds and thousands of hectares of forest in northern Alberta. But still, it's a brush fire, and it's one of the many 400 and some fires that have occurred in Canada this spring, so far this fire season. By the way, the suspect was not hard to find, according to police, as he approached first responders and admitted to setting a fire. So when you say no evidence, nobody's reporting this? How about this? May 4th. Mainstream media. Charges laid in a series of intentionally set Alberta wildfires. Charges have been laid against an Alberta man in connection with what RCMP call a series of intentionally set wildfires, as well as other arsons. Cold Lake RCMP and the RCMP Serious Crimes Branch, the Forestry Crimes Unit, and investigators from the Alberta Forestry and Parks and Tourism worked together to investigate these fires. And granted, these fires that we're talking about, this man was arrested for, actually occurred last year. But this is not an unusual thing. Okay? So, May 17th, Grand Prairie RCMP arson investigation. One suspect arrested. Police ask for public assistance in identifying others. 5 separate fires. Brush fires, grass fires in the Grand Prairie region. That's this year. What else? Just yesterday, June the 7th, it was reported that the police in Quebec, the Sûreté du Québec, the SQ, which is the provincial police, it's sort of like the state police in the United States, or the OPP, Ontario Provincial Police here in Ontario, where I'm broadcasting from, suspect arson caused wildfire in at least one, a large wildfire in at least one part of Quebec. Okay, why am I reporting this? Because I want you to understand that what the mainstream media is reporting in the United States, the derogatory language, the dismissive language, okay, the ridicule of people who are saying, hold the phone. Hit the pause button, guys. A lot of this stuff can be, and often is, caused by human beings who are being incautious, and it's not caused by climate change. And in any event, as I said at the beginning of this segment, and it's a request, it's an open request, you just have to go to my website, www.josephbenamy.com, all one word, without the hyphen. Send me an email. Use the contact form. Point to me the research that supports the argument that fires that we see today, wildfires, are in fact the result of climate change. Show me the direct causal relationship. Don't show me correlation. Show me the causal relationship between the two. I'm interested. I want to be shown that I'm wrong. When I say I don't see this, that means I don't see it. Maybe the evidence is out there. I don't see it. But what I can tell you is that there's plenty of evidence that these fires that go on, wildfires, at least in Canada, I can't speak to in the United States, I haven't really looked into it, but here in Canada, a lot of the fires that you see every single year are in fact caused by human activity not related to the climate. not related to climate change. I don't know if that makes that much of a difference with respect to the whole wildfire season, which admittedly is more active so far this year than normal. But that's not my point. My point is that all of the mainstream media reports dismissing any discussion about alternative causes, all of those media reports that dismiss these and call them nothing more than conspiracy theories, those media reports are categorically wrong. That's my point. Changes in the climate, drier season so far, a little warmer than normal. All of these things can contribute to the conditions that make fires worse regardless of the cause. And if that's the point you want to make with respect to climate change or alleged climate change, I'll concede that point. But I will not concede that people who are saying, hey, hang on a second, guys, there are other things going on here, and then the media reports that, oh, that's just a conspiracy theory. You're a climate change denier. Those are all categorically wrong. Let's take a break, and I have some more interesting information to pass on to you so that you are better informed about what the situation is with respect to wildfires in general here in Canada on an annual basis. It may surprise you, some of the information that I have to pass on. So we are going to be back in a couple of minutes here on the Joseph Ben-Ami Show. Do not go away.
It's just a feeling that this might be right for us, for you and me. There is just a look I think this might be right for us, for you and me. There is just a feeling that this might be right for us, for you and me. There is just a look I think this might be right for us, for you and me.
And we are back. Thank you so much for joining us. I am the host of the show, Joseph Ben-Ami. You are tuned in to the Joseph Ben-Ami Show for Thursday, June the 8th, 2023. Have you noticed how I wear this little cap, by the way? For those of you who don't know, I happen to be Orthodox Jewish. This is not my Muslim cap. Okay, and I'm not just wearing it to cover up a bald spot. So I just, for those of you who are watching on video, I got a couple of questions and comments about it, and in the past couple of days. So I just thought I'd mention that to you. We've been talking about the wildfires here in Canada. The apocalypse! The apocalypse! Say it ain't so, ladies and gentlemen. The apocalypse is striking here in Canada. Yes. Okay. Dive! Okay. Having too much fun, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. I have promised you a little bit more information. If you want to know a little bit more about context and perspective, if you want to set Canada's wildfire emergency into some context, some perspective, then I would recommend to you that you check out an article that was published in Canadian Geographic magazine, the online version anyway. And Canadian Geographic is not a fringe magazine. It's mainstream, prestigious, authoritative, if you will. So this is not some kooky stuff going on out there. So I'd recommend that you maybe, go online, check it out, and read some of this stuff. I'll bring some of it to your attention. This was published on May the 15th, a little less than a month ago, here in Canada. And it's an article on how we can use new technology to catch those people who are setting fires that develop into large-scale wildfires here in Canada. Apparently, it's not as rare as you think, ladies and gentlemen. It's a common occurrence. And every year there are investigations, and every year there are charges laid. But unfortunately, in most cases, even if we know that the fires were set deliberately, even if we know we're not able to actually apprehend the suspect, and even in those cases where we actually do apprehend a suspect, a conviction is rare because the technology and that is presented as evidence in court isn't really or hasn't really always been ironclad. And that's what this article is about. But the first thing that jumps out at you when you read this article is a fact. Here in Canada, the wildfire season, if I could use that term, starts in April and it ends in September. It may be delayed a little bit later because of weather conditions. It may extend a little bit later because of weather conditions. But roughly speaking, when we talk about the wildfire season in Canada, we're talking about April to September. So April, May, June, July, August, September. 6 months. Let's call it 6 months. In that 6-month period, every single year in Canada, there are somewhere approximating 8,000 wildfires. Every year. Some years it's higher, some years it's fewer. But here we are. We're well now into the 3rd month of Canada's wildfire season. And the number of wildfires that are burning currently in Canada, is under 500. Is that more than normal for this time? I don't know, but reportedly it is. How much more, I don't know. This idea of smoke being a consequence of fire, well, that is one of the byproducts of fire is smoke. And if you've ever lived in an area where there are fires, whether they are controlled burns or wildfires, you're going to have smoke problems. I have been in places where they've done uh, controlled burns of old crops on the prairie provinces where for miles you almost couldn't see 15 feet or 20 feet in front of you. For those of you who are on the old imperial system, let's call it 5 to 10 meters in front of you if you're on the if you're following the metric system. For miles and miles on some highways, like a thick fog, because that's a byproduct of fires. So having a number of fires and having a lot of smoke is not a new thing. How the smoke is drifting, how long it lasts, is a complicated discussion. It has to do with wind patterns at that particular time, temperatures, air pressure, lots of factors that go in, some of which we don't fully 100% understand. But the fact, ladies and gentlemen, that there's a lot of smoke that is drifting across the border into the United States is not an indication that there are significantly more fires going on in Canada at this moment than normal, because you would be facing the same situation under the same atmospheric conditions last year or next year, even if we had significantly fewer fires going on. So nobody should be looking at the fact that there is smoke drifting into New York City that apparently, allegedly originates in Canadian wildfires. And I would point out that, you have had some fires in New York State, so some of that smoke might actually be from some of the fires that you've had in New York State or in Pennsylvania, okay, or in New Jersey. But let's assume that it's all coming from Canada because of the way that the atmospheric conditions today happen to be dictating where the smoke goes. All right? So it's all I'm saying here is, for all of you people down there in the United States that are all up in arms about how Canada is burning, Canada's burning, Canada's burning. Even Global News, as I said yesterday, this was one of their headlines. Canada burning. You have no idea how immense this country is. How much forest we have in this country. 400, 500 fires burning at once. At the risk of sounding dismissive, not actually that big a deal. This is a very big country with lots of uninhabited forest area. So nobody should be thinking to themselves, Canada is burning. Canada is not burning. As I said, right here, according to Canadian Geographic magazine, every year about 8,000 wildfires are reported across the country. And also, according to this, about half of them are started by humans. Humans start more than half of all wildfires. Sometimes intentionally. I like that a little aside. And invariably, they leave evidence behind. So this whole article is about that. It's about the evidence left behind by humans who intentionally set fires that develop into wildfires. Now, why do these fires develop into wildfires? That itself is a complicated issue. Okay, it's not due entirely to climate. And climate change, no climate change. Every year, some years we have drier conditions, some years we have wetter conditions. All of these things play a role. Plus, where the fire is also, it's important to know, because the forests that do burn, some of them are just wild and they are not managed. This is too big a country and we have too much forest to manage. And when I say manage, I mean reducing undergrowth, getting rid of the dead wood. It's too much for us to handle. But in those areas where we ought to be managing and historically have managed, there's been a move away from doing that. And that incredibly increases the danger of a fire getting out of control. Nothing to do with climate. So that's a factor as well that needs to be considered. All right. I think we better go for our final break of the evening, ladies and gentlemen. Stay with us. We'll be back here again on the Joseph Ben-Ami Show in a little more than 2 minutes. And we are back. Thanks for joining us. Just a couple of minutes left on the show for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate you joining in. I guess the way I would want to tie this all up again is to say, look, facts count. And I know that the thing in the conservative world these days has been to say feelings are not facts, facts are not feelings, and that's all very true. But we're not really talking about feelings when we talk about wildfires and causes, etc. We're talking about facts. And the fact is that the contrary to what many of you in the United States may have been viewing, and many of you here in Canada who get your news from the U.S. might also be thinking, and that is that all of the talk that's been going on about possible arson and human causes of these fires that are plaguing Canada right now, that this is nothing more than climate change denying conspiracy theories, people wearing tin hats, etc. Not true. It's not true at all. It's actually a normal thing. If you follow this stuff year in and year out, there are about 8,000 wildfires that occur in Canada, and somewhere about half of them, if not more, are caused by human activity, not related to the climate, and amongst those, a certain amount are also arson. So when we talk about this, and the mainstream media here in Canada has been reporting investigations and arrests already have been made with respect to this. And there's nothing out of the ordinary here. Plus, we're not experiencing a cataclysmic number of fires here. So, and there's no connection, there's no plausible, demonstrable connection between climate change and the number of fires that we are seeing right now in this country. So, chill out, no pun intended, relax. Canada's not burning, the world is not burning, everything is going precisely the way nature intended it to go. That's my story for this evening, ladies and gentlemen. Some housekeeping details. Of course, as you know, our show is only on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So, no show tomorrow night, Friday night. But you can join Nick Vandergrat and I on Sunday night. So go on to the YouTube channel, Nick and Joe Show, or you can catch it podcast, etc. We'll be passing on more information about that. But yeah, Nick would just be going wild if he was on the show tonight. A couple of other things, ladies and gentlemen. Again, no news yet about the CRTC hearings into whether or not we should be banning Fox News Network here in Canada. As I've mentioned already a few times in the past few days, the best way to stay on top of this is to log on to my website, www.josephbenamy.com, all one word without the hyphen, and subscribe to my email list. It's absolutely free. We do not share that list with anybody. So if you log into that, we'll pass on information to you about that and other things from time to time. So it's a great way to stay informed. If you don't want to stay informed that way, well, if you're watching the show on YouTube, subscribe. Doesn't cost you anything. Subscribing on YouTube doesn't mean you're paying an annual fee or a monthly fee or a weekly fee. And all it means is that you get notified when a new show is either live or been uploaded. Same thing with Rumble. Rumble.com is our main platform these days, and we're very happy to be on it. Okay, so a couple of other things. Go to the website, as I said, www.josephbenamy.com. While you are there, feel free to send me an email. Just use the contact form. I do read my emails, and I do answer them. So, maybe at some point in time, I will get 10,000 emails a day. But until such a time, not a problem. Don't be afraid to tell me where I'm wrong about all of this stuff. Don't be afraid to send me tips on things. Next week, I'm not sure what day, but we'll have our friend Tom Harris on from the International Climate Science Coalition talking about the latest trends, as we discussed briefly today in the headlines, in climate science, so-called, and the alarmist agenda, and the upcoming conference in Dubai. COP28, I think it is, they're calling it. In any event, ladies and gentlemen, we will catch you next Monday evening here on the Joseph Ben-Ami Show. Until then, God bless, and we will see you then.